Tomorrow marks the one-year anniversary since Joe Biden took the oath of office as President of the United States. And even if you were grading on a curve, by all objective reporting, he would get an F for failing the American people on all the challenges that we're seeing our country face right now.
We asked respondents to give him a letter grade. What we found was a little bit alarming for Biden, which is a lot of people gave him an F, and that's a measurement of just how much hatred there is for him, especially on the right. 69% of self-identified Republicans giving him an F. On the issue of unity, he's not a progressive, he's a moderate, he is a unifying figure, I think, objectively, or tries to be. He got an F by 40% of the public on that grade. And
how many times during the campaign did candidate Joe Biden say, I'm going to shut down the virus? He actually bragged that he had a plan on day one to combat the virus. And then what happened just a few weeks ago before governors across the country? He admitted he doesn't have a plan. There is no federal solution, and he dumped it on the governors of our state because he's failed over and over again. There was a bombshell report that came out over the Christmas break that laid out that back in October, President Biden was presented with a plan for testing for all Americans all across the country. 750 million tests for everybody to be ready during Christmas because they predicted there would be this surge. They actually saw it coming. And they presented the plan to Joe Biden, who said he was going to shut down the virus as a candidate. And you know what Joe Biden did in October? He rejected that plan. I wonder if today, when Joe Biden holds his press conference to talk about, he can't talk about any of his accomplishments as president for a year, but he surely should have the opportunity to address whether or not he rejected that plan and why. We've posed this to other administration officials. We haven't gotten an answer yet. Jamie Comer and I asked the heads of the Select Subcommittee on Coronavirus and the Oversight Committee to have a hearing into this testing failure by the Biden administration, and they don't want to have a hearing on it. They seemed overeager to talk about transparency and accountability until all of a sudden they were accountable.
The first one, I'm kind of amazed hasn't been brought up more in this room. So I emailed you about this yesterday and again this morning so that you'd be able to track down a firm answer on two details here. The first detail is which administration officials attended that October 22nd meeting. For example, did Drs. Fauci and Walensky participate? And was President Biden personally briefed at the time on that recommendation before it was passed over?
Well, maybe people haven't asked about it because we've done a lot of what was discussed in that meeting that happened a couple of months ago. And the issue at the time, which was a very small part of the conversation, was that the market had not expanded enough to at that moment in time be able to launch the website we're launching tomorrow.
The idea was not adopted. How can President Biden shut down the virus if he's not being briefed on these ideas? That's my question. So I'm wondering who were the advisors, and was President Biden briefed on this idea at the time?
Well, I think I just answered your question, which you may not have been listening. Maybe you were waiting to read your next question, which is fine. But I just answered your question. Let me finish, Stephen, I'm finishing. What I said to you just a minute ago is that we did not have the capacity at the moment. But the market did not have the capacity at that moment to do what we're doing tomorrow.
Yes, I hear what you're saying, but that's not the question I asked. The question I asked was,
do you have another question? I think I've answered your question.
Was President Biden briefed at the time?
Again, I've answered your question. If you have another one, I'm happy to answer it. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next person.
I didn't get answers there, but I'll move on to another one.
Great.
How supportive would the president be of passing smaller versions or piecemeal versions of that?
Well, first of all, I would dispute your characterization, John, of it as a big spending bill, since it is entirely paid for, will not impact the deficit, and does not raise taxes on anybody making less than $400,000 a year. So
we're inspired, Cesar Chavez, we're inspired by all of these leaders.
Candidate Joe Biden talks so much about following the science, and President Joe Biden has been manipulating the science. We saw the reports, as Jamie Comer talked about, that the teachers, union bosses were able to manipulate a report by the CDC on school reopenings. Think of how destructive keeping schools closed has been to our young kids over this last year and a half. We're going to look back years later and say, how did anybody let that happen? When Kids today are not getting the same learning environment outside the classroom as they are inside the classroom. All the science says the kids should be back in school. And when Joe Biden had an opportunity to stand up for the kids, he instead chose to stand with the teachers' unions against those kids and manipulated a report that kept kids out of school. Joe Biden still to this day, a year into his presidency, still doesn't have an FDA commissioner. And the FDA has been called a rudderless ship in the middle of a pandemic. And he ran on shutting down the virus, and you wonder why it's not shut down. Those are the kind of accountability questions that we've been raising. The Democrats don't want to have accountability and transparency, but when we get the majority, we will. That is going to be something that we aggressively pursue to get answers to these questions that hopefully Joe Biden will answer later today.
This week marks 1 year since Joe Biden was sworn into office, and it is 1 year of complete far-left socialist Democrat control in Washington. And in just 1 year, what have we seen? Joe Biden's failed leadership has led to crisis after crisis for the American people. Hardworking families are suffering from an economic crisis, an energy crisis, a border crisis, an education crisis, a national security crisis, and now a worsening COVID crisis. This week, House Republicans will highlight the many failures we have seen this year under Democrats' one-party rule. Yesterday, we kicked off the week with a roundtable hosted by Leader McCarthy, focused on our children's education and the impact that Democrat lockdowns are having on kids across the country. This afternoon, you will hear from House Republicans about the economic crisis created by Joe Biden and House Democrats' out-of-control, reckless spending. And on Friday, we will start the day by highlighting the national security crises focusing on Joe Biden's weakness on the world stage that has emboldened our adversaries in Beijing, Tehran, and Moscow. House Republicans will close out the week by defending our right to life with supporters from across the country.